Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. What an exciting story we're listening to right now. We have discovered that both the boys in the woods had an encounter with the Wendigo, who tried to impersonate their mothers, and they thought that they'd been caught going off into the woods in the middle of the night, but in fact the Wendigo lured them to him. But luckily Mr. Fierceling, who lived next door to the woods, was able to rescue them by firing after the Wendigo. So let's find out what is going to happen next, because it appears that the Wendigo still imposes a great threat to the boys, because now he's smelt them, now he's seen them, he wants them because he's got an insatiable appetite. But Ian Fierceling has a plan that he believes is going to help the boys, and he wants them to meet someone. So let's continue with part 4 of our story. The following morning I was exceedingly grateful that it was a Saturday. I was absolutely exhausted, as you can imagine, and still in a state of disbelief about the paradoxical, intrepid adventure the previous night had bestowed on us, that in the cold light of day seemed almost impossible to actually believe. I reminded myself that Felix and I had encountered the Wendigo last night. What might have become of us, I wondered, had Ian Fierceling not come to our aid? And knowing what the worst outcome might possibly have been, sent shivers of dread down my spine. I still felt as if everything that had transpired had all been a horrifying nightmare. But as I glanced down at my filthy clothes that I was still wearing from the previous night, that were covered with muddy patches, I knew with absolute certainty that the previous night's activities had not been fictitious by any manner of means. I also noticed I had brought in with me a huge trail of leaves that were scattered liberally around the bedroom floor. And if that wasn't bad enough, there were dirt marks and smudges all across the window. This was the tangible evidence needed to confirm to myself that last night had indeed been real. How I wished it was all a lucid dream on my part, because I would have been happier to ignorantly believe that creatures like the Wendigo did not exist in our reality. But now I knew differently. I was glad for the reprieve the weekends brought, which meant that I didn't have to go to school on this day. My mother entered the bedroom later that morning, after I once again had slipped off into a deep sleep, for getting out of my cosy bed after a hellish night had been close to impossible. My mother was now seated at the end of my bed, so the springs bounced as she sat down, and that brought me out of my slumber. I sat up warily, letting out a substantial groan. My mother stared at me. There was a worried expression written all over her face, but her eyes immediately lit up when I looked at her through somewhat groggy but sleepy eyes. "What time is it?" I asked. "It's almost lunchtime, love." "That's really late," I said, looking rather bemused. "Yes, it is very late, Barker. This is a first for you, is it not? Sleeping in so late, I mean. I didn't want to wake you up. You were dead to the world. Anyone would have thought you were up and about all night, for you to be so obviously exhausted. I'm really worried about you, love," she said gingerly. "You would tell me and your father if there was something wrong, wouldn't you? It's not like you to sleep in this late, even if it is a Saturday morning. Should I be calling a doctor for you?" she asked. "Are you coming down with something, perhaps? Even in summer it's possible to catch a cold, you know." I wiped away the sleepy debris from my eyes and groaned. "I'm fine, Mum. Quit worrying about me, will you?" "That's just it, love. I'm not sure you are fine. I might remind you that you barely ate your dinner last night. You missed breakfast this morning and slept like an absolute baby, and would have continued to do so if I had not decided to wake you up right now, I'm most sure. Felix came around to the house earlier on his bicycle. He wanted to see you, you know. He seemed very eager to speak to you, but I told him you were sleeping, and he told me not to wake you up. He told me that when you woke up that he wanted you to message him right away on your cell phone." "But why didn't you wake me up when he came around?" I asked indignantly, unable to disguise the annoyance in my voice. "Because, love, I figured if you were sleeping in so late, that your body must be craving the sleep. Our bodies are very clever, you know. They tell us when we need more rest, and we need to listen to that advice. For some reason, your body is craving sleep. Maybe at the very least your immune system is fighting off a bug and is slightly compromised, which would explain the need for you to get more rest. I'm hungry, I said to my mother. My stomach is rumbling, I said, rubbing my stomach. My mother's face immediately brightened. Anyone would think I'd told her she'd won $1 million on the state lottery. She looked that pleased. Oh, that is such a relief to hear you say that, Barker. If you're hungry, then you're back to your good old self again, and that is good news indeed. Get dressed, will you? Goodness gracious me! You're wearing yesterday's clothes. You didn't even bother to get into your pajamas last night. Never mind, you boys will be boys at times, and I just have to accept that. Now get up, wash your hands and brush your teeth, and I'll fix you something for lunch. Goodness gracious me! What on earth has gone on with your bedroom? It's covered with leaves. Where did they come from? She asked me curiously. I was inwardly praying that she wouldn't see all the mess and the smudges around my window pane, but she didn't look at the window, which was a huge relief. I think the leaves blew in the window last night. I left the window open, you see. There was quite a wind blowing outside. My mother looked momentarily bemused. A wind? Last night? Goodness gracious me, I had no idea. I'm such a light sleeper. You'd think I would have heard something like that. Never mind. She blew me a kiss and whispered, See you in a minute, love. I watched her leaving the bedroom behind, quietly closing the door, and I realized in that quintessential moment how much I deeply loved both of my parents, and how very glad I was that the swap had been made all those years ago, when I had been a 4-year-old boy, as now I was living with my biological parents, and it was always meant to be that way. And yet, in the grand scheme of things, everything like that seemed so minuscule compared to the monumental reality that both me and Felix had come face to face with the Wendigo last night, and I never wanted to see that hideous thing ever again, as long as I lived. I picked up my cell phone from the nightstand and began to text a message to Felix, hoping that he would respond as soon as possible. Did last night really happen? I asked him. Or am I waking up from a horrible nightmare? Please tell me I'm waking up from a horrible nightmare. But the evidence says differently. There are leaves all over my bedroom, and I'm wearing yesterday's clothes, and they're covered with dirt. So I'm inclined to believe that last night really happened. But you'll make me feel very relieved if you tell me otherwise. Felix's reply was prompt. Last night really happened. Remember the letters from your mother to mine? That was no dream. You and I were raised by the wrong parents for 4 years of our lives. And yes, we did see the Wendigo in the woods last night, calling us with our mother's voices. And yes, Ian Fierceling came to our rescue and fired a few shots after the thing. So yes, it was a nightmare, but a real one at that. I'm sorry to tell you that, bro. It was not fictitious. I came by your house earlier on. Your mum said you were dead to the world. I couldn't believe you managed to get to sleep after the events of last night. That thing we saw has haunted me the entire morning. I stared at Felix's message incredulously, digesting the horrifying truth of what had happened the previous night. For the strange paradoxical course of events that had unravelled in the woods seemed so surreal to me. Looking back, I really believe encountering the ghost of Deirdre Horace would have been a walk in the park compared to what Felix and I experienced with the Wendigo. I couldn't believe that such a horrific creature like this could actually exist in our reality. But Ian Fierceling impassionately believed that there was a portal in our woods that would open up at night, allowing these monstrous creatures to slip into our reality. As I thought about the monaciously demonical creature and its blazing red eyes that burned through us like a laser beam, and its hideous grotesque-looking face, and mouth full of yellow fang-like teeth that were mocking us as it spoke to us in our mother's voices, I shivered with dread. I remembered how both Felix and I had helplessly been drawn towards the Wendigo. almost as if it had some kind of dominant, forceful hold over us that we were powerless to resist. I couldn't imagine what would have happened to us had Ian Fierceling not come to our rescue. I very much doubted that we would still be here if it weren't for him. Then I remembered his ominous words that he had spoken last night. He was saying the threat the Wendigo imposed was still over us, and that we were still in mortal danger of the creature. So I hurriedly texted back Felix. "I'm so glad Ian Fierceling came to our rescue," I wrote. "If it wasn't for him, I dread to think—" I didn't finish the sentence, of course, for Felix would know exactly what I meant, and sometimes, in my experience, less words can say so much. "You're dead right about that, bro," came the swift reply. "You heard what Mr. Fierceling said. We're still in mortal danger. He said the Wendigo could easily drag us out of our beds in the middle of the night while we were dreaming, and we wouldn't even know about it. It would be like we would sleepwalk into the woods and be unconscious of all our actions. I can't believe, well, actually I can believe that the Wendigo is capable of doing all this. It obviously has supernatural powers. We need to go to Ian Fierceling's house tonight. He's got a plan to help us, if you remember. So you need to be there. I'll see you there at 12 tonight. Ian Fierceling says there's someone he needs us to meet who can help us. Maybe it's someone who knows a lot about how to outsmart the Wendigo. I can only hope so. See you then," came my prompt response. "Oh, there you are, Barker," said my mother, as I entered the kitchen. "I've made you a brunch. Given you missed breakfast, and it's now lunchtime, and I can see you're starving hungry." "Mum, you're an absolute gem," I said, staring down enthusiastically at the plate full of pancakes, bacon, eggs, hash brown and sausages. My mother didn't say a word, but she sat down opposite me at the kitchen table, watching me wolf down every single mouthful until I'd cleaned up my plate. "Oh," she said, sighing with abject relief, once I'd scraped my plate completely clean. "I'm so glad to see you eating again, love. I was so worried about your poor flailing appetite last night. You'd think I'd be pleased, wouldn't you, that you're eating less? For it saves on the grocery bills. But no, I wasn't pleased at all. When you don't eat, it's so unlike you that I worry. It's out of character for you to have a pitiful appetite. Your father, of course, said I was overreacting to worry about you so much. But I reminded him that you're growing up. You normally have such a hearty appetite, don't you? So it isn't like you not to eat. And in the last day or so, you've looked decidedly peaky, if you don't mind my saying so, love. And you've seemed somewhat distracted, almost as if your mind is a million miles away. But looking at you now, I feel a whole lot better about you, because the colour's come back to your face." "Ma'am," I said, looking up at her in earnest, "do you believe in the Wendigo?" The words popped out of my mouth before I had a chance to rein them in, and I regretted even asking my mother this question, for it was a stupid question to ask someone like my mother, who was naturally cynical by nature, especially about anything cryptic or paranormal. My mother let out a chuckle. "You know something, Barker. You do sometimes ask not only the funniest, but the most unorthodox questions. You know me. I've never been superstitious by nature. What on earth made you think of the Wendigo of all things, for goodness sake? I haven't heard that word mentioned for a long time. But believe it or not, my good old father believed in the Wendigo." "He did?" I asked, my face lighting up. "Yes, he did," said my mother, rolling her eyes in exasperation, as if she thought the very idea was pathetic. "I mean, have you ever? Everybody knows the Wendigo is just an ancient legend, a fictitious creature of sorts. But you know your grandfather. He was very insistent about those things, claiming they were definitely real, and that there was nothing legendary about them at all. But if you ask me, he was talking absolute nonsense. But why are you asking me all these questions, love? What's made you think about the Wendigo?" "Oh, it's nothing," I said, shrugging my shoulders nonchalantly, and deciding to cut the conversation off as quickly as I could. There was no point in talking to my mother about a subject she obviously did not believe in. But I was very pleased to learn that my grandfather had not doubted that the Wendigo existed, and my grandfather was one of the shrewdest and wisest people I have ever known. It was at 10 to 12 that night that my cell phone began to bleep, and I was awoken from a rather restless sleep by the sound of my alarm going off. I had gone to bed that night in my clothes so that I wouldn't have to change. It had been a fitful night's sleep, for I was absolutely terrified that the moment I actually drifted off, the Wendigo would gain some kind of supernatural power over my unconscious dreamy state and lure me out into the woods. I was sure that Felix's sleep was equally as disruptful. I went through the same routine as I had done the previous night, trying my utmost to be as quiet as I possibly could, so as not to arouse the attention of my parents, who had gone to bed later that evening, so they might be even more inclined to hear any disruptive noises that I might potentially make, so I needed to be extremely vigilant. I was glad the house was steeped in a serene, very calm silence, which meant that maybe my parents had drifted off to sleep after all. I managed to squeeze myself through the window of my bedroom with a few twists and turns, my sneakers finally hitting the wet, dewy grass on the other side. Then with my torchlight in my hands I made my way to the yard shed, drawing an inwardly nervous breath, as I knew once again, when I opened the shed door to retrieve my bicycle, that the shed door would not be cooperative on my account. It seems I was not wrong about that. The annoying door shrieked loudly as I pushed it open. My heart began to pound vigorously in my chest, as, let's not kid, I was absolutely terrified that if I made the slightest noise that I would arouse my parents, and this was a night I could ill afford their attention. It was so important for me and Felix to meet up with Ian Fierceling so that he could help protect us against the Wendigo. I quickly removed my bicycle from the shed, my eyes pinned on my parents' bedroom. If a light went on in their bedroom, I knew my cover was immediately blown, but thank goodness nothing happened. The house and the bedroom were left in darkness. I gingerly dragged my bicycle very cautiously to the end of our driveway, taking fastidious care not to make a single sound. I then cautiously mounted my bike, cycling very nervously past the houses in our street, until I reached the cul-de-sac facing the woodgrove, where Felix was once again waiting for me rather impatiently outside Mr. Fierceling's property. We placed our bicycles against a tree there, and then walked across the front yard. It only boasted a few trimmed hedges and several scant-looking trees. Finally we came to the rather scratched-up front door. At a glance, Ian Fierceling's property, or bungalow so to speak, really did look rather run down and sad, almost as if it was begging someone to give it a much-needed facelift. I rather suspected Ian Fierceling probably didn't have the money to make the necessary improvements to his home, for he came across to me from our previous night's rendezvous as quite a fastidious person. The night was inauspicious. It was dark and clammy. The moon had become shadowy, as it was ambiguously covered by a thick, foggy cloud cover, and seemed somehow reticently reluctant to cast any light upon us, and even the usual twinkling stars were obscured from our sight, almost as if a seamstress had sewn the glistening diamante jewels on the inside of a black jacket, and not on the outside, so they were pretty much close to invisible. I was glad to see there was a light on in Ian Fierceling's house, so I assumed he was waiting up for us, which was a relief. My heart was weighed down, it was that heavy, as I hated being out here at the dead of night, given what me and Felix had gone through the previous night with the Wendigo. It would seem the shocking secret we had discovered about our parents going home with the wrong child after we were born seemed like water off a duck's back to us, compared to our encounter with the Wendigo, which had shaken us up to the core and shattered our view of reality so substantially that we were seeing the world through a completely different lens now. I thought about my mother's reaction at lunchtime when I asked her about the Wendigo. She seemed to think my grandfather was an old fool to believe in a legend such as the Wendigo, but she was poking fun at something she would never understand or appreciate. unless of course she happened to lay her eyes on the Wendigo itself, much like we had done, for we knew we would never be the same after this experience. I also knew if Felix and I did not get the help we needed right away, that the Wendigo imposed a very real threat to our lives. I could only hope with all my heart and soul that Ian Fierceling knew what he was doing, and could give us the safeguards we obviously needed to ensure that the Wendigo left us alone and no longer imposed a threat to us. "Oh, I'm so relieved to see you, Barker. You have no idea. I had such a horrible dream just now, before we got here. I can't believe I even managed to get to sleep. I didn't want to get any sleep at all, because I was so afraid that the moment that I fell asleep, that Wendigo would be after me and drag me into the woods. I was terrified, Barker, let me tell you." "Me too," I admitted. "I do believe the Wendigo was going to call us in the woods, in the middle of our dream state," Felix admitted. "We have to pray to God that Ian Fierceling knows what he's doing and can help us, or we're pretty much doomed, Barker. Because we can't fight against something in our sleep, can we?" "Please don't say that, Felix," I said, shuddering. "I do think Ian Fierceling knows about the Wendigo. He knows things other adults don't know about. I'm sure he can help us. He says he's got a friend who can help us." I said this, my words were etched with uncertainty. Ian Fierceling's front door abruptly opened, and there his tall, lanky figure was standing on the front porch. He beckoned us over, keeping his voice very low and mute. "Good. I'm very glad you boys came along. It's very important that you did. Zamander should be here in any moment. He'll have some answers for us, I'm most sure." "Who's Zamander?" I asked. "Never you mind about that," said Ian Fierceling. "Let's see if he's around, shall we?" I nearly jumped out of my skin when Ian Fierceling let out a loud owl hoot that was so lifelike, so very real, you would have thought an owl was perching on a tree only yards away from us and hooting like mad. What was Ian Fierceling doing, I wondered? And then, to my absolute amazement, there was another owl hoot in response, returned very promptly, and that was when I realized the owl hoots were some kind of secret code to alert Zamander to our presence, whoever Zamander was. "Good," said Ian Fierceling. "Zamander is here. He responded to my call. He knows all about the Wendigo and the portal in the woods that opens up at night. He will tell you how you can protect yourself from the Wendigo, so that you will be safe when you go to bed. You must listen to him very carefully. He speaks in a different language to us, but he uses a translation code in our heads, which is telepathic, so you will understand precisely what he's saying." "What language does he speak?" I asked excitedly. "I can speak Norwegian, German and Italian, and I'm fluent in all three languages." "You are?" said Ian Fierceling, looking decidedly impressed. "No, I'm afraid Zamander does not speak those languages, but he can understand them all, because when you talk to him he can read your mind, and that is when language is no obstacle." "What language does he speak, then, Mr. Fierceling?" I asked curiously. "I'd be damned if I know, young man," said Mr. Fierceling. I was rather puzzled that Mr. Fierceling didn't know the language his friend spoke, which seemed decidedly odd to me, but I chose to say nothing about it, and patiently waited for his friend to arrive. If I thought the world was a strange place up to then, it certainly became infinitely stranger when I saw the tall, shadowy figure of something decidedly enormous gliding towards us. My first thought was, "What the hell is that huge thing?" I could feel my heart beginning to thunder violently in my chest, so fast, in fact, that I became like a jelly bean being shaken around in a bottle. I think Ian Fierceling sensed my growing sense of disquiet. As the giant hair-covered beast moved towards us, Felix had uttered the words out loud. "What is that?" "Sorry, I forgot to mention. Zamander is a Bigfoot," said Ian Fierceling. So matter-of-factly, in fact, as if being friends with a Bigfoot was as natural as breathing. "Don't worry, kids. He means you no harm. He's a very gentle fellow. He's here to help you. Don't be intimidated by his great size." If I thought Ian Fierceling, the recluse in our street, had a mediocre, mundane life, I was seriously mistaken about that. Ian Fierceling had interactions with creatures like Bigfoot. He knew about the Wendigo. He knew about the portal in the woods. He knew about ghosts. There was nothing remotely ordinary about his life. Moments later, Zamanda was standing yards away from us. He was so huge that next to him I felt positively tiny. And let me tell you, that's a first for me, given I come from a family of human giants, due to my Norwegian roots. The Bigfoot was easily 9 foot tall, possibly more, robustly built with proportions that a heavyweight lifter could only dream of acquiring. For the first time in my life, I suddenly felt pathetically small. At school I hated towering over all the boys in my class, but Zamanda was now towering over us, like an elephant over a few little rabbits in the field. We had become those rabbits. I was completely intimidated by the seemingly imperial majesty that Zamanda exuded. He possessed a wisdom of such depth, the likes I have never seen before in my life. Of course, I've heard stories of Bigfoot before, but the creatures have always been spoken of as being inferior to human beings, as if in some way they're so much more primitive than ourselves. But nothing could have been less true in this case. In Zamanda's own presence, I felt being human made me, Felix, and Mr. Fierceling inferior to the Bigfoot's might, strength, and infinite knowledge, which far surpassed that of our own. When the Bigfoot spoke, his voice boomed like a clap of thunder in the sky that demanded respect, and immediately I paid swift attention to his every word. This human-like creature was covered in pitch-black hair, although the hair on his chin was completely white. His wizened but kindly brown eyes gave off a pronounced yellow eye-shine. "Kapinatala hanko solo dilani asikakwila hampolena tolo." "I have come," said Zamanda. He turned to me, his voice very deep. "I understand that both you boys have got yourself into a bit of a pickle. Am I right about that?" "Yes, sir," I said, not knowing how else to address a Bigfoot. My father had always told me that if a man was older than me, that I needed to call him sir, so that is what I did. "Kampinata osholakina hosa tolokatina himatila walazina zadali noko hazina tolabani." "You have been in contact with the Wendigo," said the Bigfoot. "You are going to need my urgent help, for the Wendigo will stop at nothing to draw you back into the woods when you fall asleep. So I have a plan." And with that the Bigfoot brought out a leather purse filled with a sizable collection of stones that he began to shake around in the bag. He asked me and Felix to pull out the stone that we were drawn to, that was warm to the touch. "Kantala tolo matilakwa sasina." "I want you to pull out the stone in the bag, the one that feels warm to the touch, for that will be the correct stone for you. You will sleep with a stone under your pillow for 7 consecutive nights, so the Wendigo will not be able to manipulate or intercept your dreams. After the 7 days are up, you must bury the stone under a tree in your yard, and all will be well, for there will be a veil of protection around your yard." I felt around in the leather bag for a stone that was warm to the touch, but most of the stones were cold. But finally I found one that was very warm, and the more I held it in my hand, the hotter it became. I drew it out of the bag. It was blue in colour. And for 7 nights Felix and I both slept with our individual stones under our pillows. We both slept better than we'd ever slept before a day in our lives. Once the 7 days were up, we each buried our individual stone in the earth near a tree in our yard. I was exceedingly grateful to both Ian Fierceling and Zamanda the Bigfoot for helping us against the Wendigo, and I never forgot their kindness towards us. Certainly after that event, me and Felix befriended Ian Fierceling and would visit him regularly for tea. We never did get to see Zamanda again, But I do know he's out there in the woods, watching over that portal that opens up every night. And as for the ghost of Deirdre Horace, whether she's around I do not know, but there has been no more sightings of her by the locals in our area, so I hope that she's found her peace in some way. Me and Felix never told our parents we knew about their secret concerning the mix-up over our births, as I believe, and we both believe, that some secrets should be left well alone, and this is clearly one of them. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.